Thanks for checking out this highlight from the Casually Hardcore podcast. If you want to check out the full podcast after the show, please be sure to hit the top link in the description. But now, let's do it. So obviously we have a connection with Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, multiple MMOs. That, just feeds us naturally into the first topic. How do you balance multiple games? What's your strategy? What's kind of your, your test, right? Because it's important, in my opinion, to play multiple games. But at the same time, there's a cost to it. And I'd love to know kind of how you approach it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially with MMOs, which, as a lot of us know, if you play them yourself, may involve subscriptions. They may be buy to play. There may be, generous cash shops. There's also a big time commitment that just goes into playing MMOs. So I get asked this question a lot by people, actually. The way that I sort of personally balance it is to, first off, and this is like always important with any MMO, if there's one that you want to try, double check first to see if there's some kind of free trial, there's some sort of initial like playable thing, right? Try not to overload yourself with cost right off the bat. That's like the huge thing. So I always try to find games that either have some sort of option for you to play without a subscription initially, or like have some sort of free trial. If I really have to buy one, I will. But it's always important to kind of balance what you're doing financially with MMOs, because they are an ongoing game. They have to pay for ongoing development somehow. So make sure that it works for you and that their cash shop cycles or loot boxes or pay to win or whatever it is, all those components work for you as well. When it comes to just like time scheduling, for me, I found that it helps to kind of roll different MMOs in different stages. So like I played a bunch of different MMOs before I ever actually hit Final Fantasy XIV. So I was doing WoW, I was doing SWTOR. I kind of went through a bunch looking for things that I wanted in a game. And I knew when I came out of it, I was like, I want good CC. I want good fashion wars in the end game. I want a diversity of content from casual to hardcore. More importantly than anything, I want a really good story that pulls me in and keeps me going through the game, and that shows a real attention to detail and love for lore and engagement and storytelling in the world. So when I finally got to Final Fantasy XIV, I was like, this is it. I love it. I've been a Final Fantasy fan for ages. And I got through basically all of the kind of initial stuff in 14 before I ever started rolling in Guild Wars 2, which would become my other big one. And then down the road, I got back into Elder Scrolls Online. But I tried to sort of stagger it, because when you get to the sort of end game content or you get caught up in an MMO, that's where I think you have the most freedom to kind of play around with your time, your scheduling. You're not trying to do that huge crunch initially just to get your levels, just to get geared, just to get going. So I usually try to wait until I'm between patch cycles in one, and then I bring in a new MMO and I'll go really hard on the new one and then sort of balance from then on out around the patch cycles of either game. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So some of these games like Final Fantasy, that initial chunk is getting a character to cap, keep staying up on story, but like you do a lot of top end stuff in games too. You savage raid with Sharply Dressed Man, like you do a lot more than most variety streamers. They end up, sometimes the risk of burnout for variety streamers is that they end up only touching the first half of a bunch of games, and they do that initial serving, and the initial servings can be shockingly similar, right? They're all establishing lore, they're all establishing combat precedents, but in a way where death is usually a minor penalty and a minor risk. They're all feeding you constant loot that really, as a result, only feels so meaningful. Like they're all just getting their general, like the first 80%, and that last 20% is really in that back half. How do you decide how far to go into that back half? Like what made you pick savage raiding in 14 where it's not required?
I think for 14 it wasn't so much picking to do it as it was I have to do this or I will be sad inside. Because
Okay.
I love the designs. I love the designs of the raids, the bosses. I mean, yes, you have to choose to make a commitment for time and energy and mechanical preparation and raiding. So I don't mean to dismiss any of that, but there are some games where if I love the world, if I love the fights, if I love the way that the team play comes together, it doesn't even really feel like an option to me. It just feels like, okay, and then I will have to do this because I want to see the really hardcore version of this fight. I want to feel the stakes in this world. I want to be a part of that. So I knew that when I got that far in 14, and especially because they do some stuff with bonus like versions of fights and all of the rewards and the dyeable gear and everything that you get, I was like, I really do want to invest the time into this. 14 out of all my MMOs is definitely the one that's most time intensive when it comes to end game. But I'm even there. I mean, we're part of a static that we kind of consider ourselves, mid-core but serious. So we meet 3 times a week and we've cleared the current tier. We've been farming it. but we're not going like 5 nights a week every single day, 8 out, it's not that kind of thing. So that left me a little bit of room to then also do raiding in Guild Wars 2, which is very different, and I've been dabbling in some endgame stuff in Elder Scrolls Online now. So I try to just sort of schedule those and do what I can. With our stream, we teach new players in Guild Wars 2 how to raid 3 nights a week. So I jump in for Saturday nights, but then we have people that help and really kind of, keep that moving and teaching people. So it's always just kind of like a group effort, finding groups that work for you and then kind of like slotting them into what you're going to be doing each night and what those time commitments will look like.
And then how do you balance that with new games coming online? There's more games than coming out a year than anybody could play. But you were playing, what's the new Square title called? Strategy Triangle. Insert the following, ad lib the same 3 words.
Geometry Crayon.
Yeah. It's Geometry Table Chair. And you were playing that the other day, and you're playing it a lot. It looks great. It's from the same people. I think it's from the same team that made Axpath Traveler, which also was gorgeous and way outperformed everything. They built that team to make Switch titles. And you were playing that, and then you've played, I think you played Divinity. You definitely played Baldur's Gate 3. So, like, you get really into those. And so, like, how do you decide? Those are games that do technically have an end, depending on their replayability. Like, there's too many of those coming out a year. How do you decide which ones make it and which ones don't make the cut?
That's probably the hardest question, to be honest, Chris. I'm sure both of you can also. It's funny to me because when you get into MMOs, you get into like the cycle and the pacing and the patches, and it's like much easier to structure stuff. But my poor neglected Steam library, there's like 500 games in there that I bought because I was like, I'm gonna play this. And then 5 years later, I'm like, oh, I forgot about you. Sorry, bud. Like,
I know. My computer hardware got better when I finally made the commitment to stop adding to my pile of shame. Because it's just like, oh, I spend all this money on gaming. Oh, because gaming is expensive? No.
No.
I'm only getting to $100 worth of games a year. But that's not what it costs to be a gamer. Because it was on sale.
It was on sale on Steam. I know, and they send you that nice little email that's like, "Ooh, hey friend, saw that your wish list has 70% off on this game."
You're gonna lose money if you don't buy this. It's a mistake. And did you know people who buy this frequently buy this bundle?
Did you see this other title you might like? It's also great. And then by then I'm like $200 deep into Steam, and I'm like, but I got them all 70% off.
Well, they also Square Enix, who's now going to be doing directs, comes out and they're like, and there's a new Final Fantasy.
I know.
Well, they just announced Turtles. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming back, and I'm so excited. So I'm looking forward to that one personally. I'm a fan.
They started doing directs, and I was like, I wish you didn't do this because I don't want to know about all the games I'm going to have to buy and then not play for 2 years. But no, I guess the way that I pick, because I do try to work through some, and it's especially for me games that. Like, one, I've stopped a lot of times just buying games before anybody has said anything about them. I kind of wait. I wait until one has been out for just a little bit. And I, look at a bunch of different reviews from a ton of different sources, people who have all different kinds of perspectives. I'll look at some of the gameplay on Twitch or things like that. And then usually I'll kind of go, yeah, this is one that I definitely am feeling like I want to get into. Strong story, interesting characters, unique. I actually do love strategy gameplay. So that's one that I always look for. But I really am up for just about anything with indie titles. I like seeing what people are doing, creative stuff in the genre, female leads, LGBTQIA plus representation. All of that stuff sells the game to me and means a lot to me. So I usually try to look for studios that I think are doing something interesting, or they're franchises that I really enjoy, like with Baldur's Gate. You were talking about that one in particular. Divinity Original Sin 2 was phenomenal. I mean, holy cow, talk about a game. If you want to basically play like a D&D campaign with your friends, but not have a DM, but have hundreds upon hundreds of co-op hours or single player hours and have every run be different. Like, I was blown away by that game. So when they brought Baldur's Gate 3 out, which is a series that I grew up playing and love, I never thought we'd see a new one. So I was super excited. And Larian was doing it. I was like, okay, well, we're going to play this game. So it's one of those things where I just try to sort of suss out the game, get an idea for it, like what it's like, what it might be offering, play it. And I usually have now had to kind of limit myself. So I have to be like really strict. Like, I'm going to play this one and I'm going to try to get it done. And then I'm going to do all my stuff in MMOs. And then I'm going to start the next one. So if I'm not vibing with the game, I'll usually drop it pretty quick. But if I am really loving it, I've been trying to just like make an effort with single players, because sometimes that's tough for me.
Talk to me about that vibe then. Like, what is it? Like, what are the telltale signs that you either feel or start to experience, and you say, "Yeah, this is not the game for me." What does that look like to you?
Gameplay that's really clunky or just like does not feel satisfying. UI that's such a mess that it's really off-putting.
As we play 14 in Guild Wars, where I keep asking where stuff is, or like the number of times we put out stuff on Guild Wars or 14, they're like, I just wish they'd add this feature to the UI. It's in there.
It
was added 5 years ago.
How you find it is anybody's
guess. It's the checkbox within the drop down, within the box, within the tab, within the menu, within the bar.
Oh God. I mean, like the one thing is that Guild Wars 2, it actually is a pretty good UI once you get used to it. But after dealing with Final Fantasy XIV for so many years, I feel like I don't even know how to interact with other UIs anymore, because I sit here, I'm like, well, I can't have two windows open at once. That would be heresy. So let me close this one, and then I'll open. It's convoluted.
The best is the circular ones, right? You're on the market board and you get queued for a duty, and you can't go into the duty because you're on the market board, but you can't finish what you're doing on the market board because you're queued for the duty. It's that very like turn your relic weapon in as the class. So okay, so I unequip the weapon. Well, now you're not the class.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So I equipped the weapon. Well, you have to give me the weapon. Okay, so I
you
equipped
put
the weapon.
One thing on, but you don't have the job still.
What?
But then,
what are you doing?
Yeah, it's a bit of a disaster sometimes, and this is coming from someone who loves Final. Like we all love the game, you know.
Yeah, when we say stuff like that, we get accused of not liking the game. It's like we put out like 15 or 1700 YouTube videos on the game. That's a weird long con for a game we don't like. Like we've just been waiting for our big reveal.
But so help me with that UI. Yeah, it's been a trick the whole time. They've just revealed ourselves.
5 years, 1700 videos. Wait till I finally say it.
Here you go. Now, I honestly, one of the things that jumping into WoW for the first time, like this fall, I really felt spoiled by 14 and all the different settings, because it was like, and to be fair to WoW, I was always like, man, how do I do this? Chris is like, oh, you need to go install this add-on. Oh, you need to go install this add-on. Oh, the add-ons
really
are great.
Easy. It's put out by somebody not Blizzard.
Right.
It's really
and then
easy.
I go, that's so interesting, because it's like, it's so easy for me, especially having been playing 14 for so long, that I'm like, okay, I know how to do that. Like, it's just, but it's inherently baked in, and I'm just like, I hope that they're sourcing like 14's like what add-ons are really popular. Let's take that and incorporate that into 14.
Add-ons are scary. It feels like clicking a link in an email. And,
it does feel weird.
WoW trains you. It's like, no, just go take candy from the strangers. We're not going to feed you. Like, and that's plan
we won't
A.
do this. They'll do it for free. So
they're
just
there in the van.
Like World of Warcraft ESO probably have the most robust add-ons. Guild Wars 2 has a couple that are used, but like ESO and WoW have it like built in, which I think is honestly super smart for a developer. 14's always been a little bit behind on that, but like you were saying, it is actually, there's so much you can do with the UI of 14, and especially even stuff for people that may have other complicating factors, right? Whether that's like mobility issues or things like that, that controller flexibility, even colorblind modes, being able to, like, there's so many things you can do with the 14 UI that makes it way more accessible for a lot of people. It's just that like figuring out how you do that stuff sometimes feels like you have opened up an arcane tome and none of it makes sense. And you're like, okay, but then I do what? And then what happens? And it's under what button? Where? It's like you're trying to just figure it out. But there's some great guides and things that Square Enix, I think, has even put out that you can look at. So there is that. Yeah, so I guess going back to the original question of what sort of determines if you keep going with the game, I think it just has to be a culmination kind of effect, right? One thing that will immediately turn me off to any game is just incredibly bad writing, characters that do things that make no sense, rampant sexism in a game. Like, I'm to the point now where I'm like, I would like my women powerful and able to step on me. If we don't get that pretty early on, or we don't get a character that maybe, you know, has her own journey of growth, but you decided to make a female character as the lead, I was going to turn it off. I'm sorry. It's like, some people may not relate to that as much, but for me personally, having grown up playing so many games that had really wonderful, iconic female leads, I'm like, we can do better than this now at this point, guys. Come on. So that's one, but I think it does. Like I said, it just has to be a culmination. If the art style is fantastic, you know, even that can balance out a clunky UI. If there's so many amazing developers right now that are just doing really cool things, like Hades, oh my gosh, so great. Persona art style, fantastic. story, all those different components can kind of come together to create an experience. And if that experience to me, like initially piques my interest and I'm like, wow, I am actually really excited about what they were doing with this, then I'll usually keep going with the game.
I've always gone gameplay first in MMOs. It's always been about the multiplayer, and I can get my story from other formats, right? It can be everything from Netflix to podcasts to single player games. There's a lot of things where like I can delve into my own brain on my own time, and then I can make multiplayer. And so like I as a story skipper through 14 until Shadowbringers, just like a big no-no. And in Shadowbringers, they invited me back in and I'm loving it. And so now I'm playing back through and I'm in ARR. And I will agree with everybody who's told me that the game is different with story. I do feel broader, in some ways deeper. I don't feel better. There are aspects of the game that I actively dislike. There are aspects of my character, of my hero, of my avatar in the game where I am the worst part of anything. Like I have no player agency to like in D&D, if I don't like the way something's going, I have control. But in an MMO, you don't, because we all have to get to the same boss encounter. So we all have to arrive at the same place in time because that's the train platform. We all have to be there. And so it funnels us towards these things. So there's moments where it feels like my character in the act of moving the sword forward is condoning things that maybe I don't agree with. And so like all through ARR, I'm just like, but I don't want to be a part of this. Like, I don't know where my character came from because I arrived on a boat in Limsa, but like, we need to go back. I don't want to be here anymore. These people are awful. So I understand that a lot of people look to story for games, and I am somewhat glad that I went through my first 15 years of MMOs not being driven by story, because I think I would have never made it this far if I had to deal with stories that I didn't enjoy in games that I've come to care a great deal about.
I hope that you really enjoyed that highlight, and I hope that you check out the full podcast. Again, link is in the description. Thanks for being here, and hope you have a fantastic day, you wonderful, beautiful individual.